Well, I think in terms of Hegseth's behavior, it's basically beyond the pale. He's just done a number of things that are unacceptable. The whole business with going on Signal and talking about classified information is just one example of that. But also the whole issue of killing people in the Caribbean who we don't even know who they are, and just murdering them is unacceptable. So that's causing all sorts of problems for him and for the administration. But the other thing is that Hegseth has a reputation for treating his subordinates in terrible ways. And when you do that, there's eventually going to be blowback, and people are going to look for opportunities to nail you. And I think there's a lot of that going on. It's payback time. And I think that moving forward, there will be more and more leaks, more and more efforts from behind the scenes to undermine Hegseth's position, which is already weakened by the fact that he just does things and says things that, again, are beyond the pale, in my opinion.
What he's describing isn't just bad behavior. It's the collapse of basic discipline at the top. When a senior official leaks classified info, authorizes killings with no accountability, and mistreats the people under him, the blowback is inevitable. Leaders like that don't lose power because of enemies. They lose it because their own team finally has enough. And that's exactly what we're seeing now.
Learned over time is that because militaries are giant killing machines, there's a very powerful tendency for people in the military in certain circumstances to kill civilians unlawfully. That tendency just sits there all the time. And what military leaders try to do is they try to keep that situation under control. And political leaders do the same thing. And military leaders and political leaders therefore go to great lengths to say that this kind of behavior is unacceptable. But they understand full well that it happens. And that's the reason so much emphasis is placed on trying to prevent it from happening. Because again, you can never lose sight of the fact that militaries are giant killing machines. And sometimes the killing gets out of control.
Militaries are designed for one purpose, and that force can easily spill beyond its boundaries if leaders aren't vigilant. That's why discipline isn't optional. It's the only barrier between lawful action and tragedy. History shows how quickly killing can slide out of control when oversight weakens. Good commanders know this and fight that tendency every single day, because once restraint collapses, the damage is irreversible, and civilians always pay the highest price when the machine runs unchecked.
The problem with someone like Hegseth, and I think it's also true of Trump, is that they don't like the idea that there are rules of engagement that limit this kind of murderous behavior. They think that soldiers should be able to just go out there and do whatever they want. And if they want to kill civilians and they think it's in the interest of the American military, they should be free to do it. And this is a prescription for disaster, right? We want to do everything we can to keep a cap on this volcano. But they're not interested. And here I'm talking about Hegseth and Trump in doing that. And it's coming back to bite them. That's what's happening here. People have seen what has happened in the Caribbean, and they see how Hegseth and Trump talk, and there's a great deal of dissatisfaction. And if you're interested in going after the administration, it's easier to go after Hegseth than it is to go after Trump. So in a very important way, dissatisfaction with Trump devolves to dissatisfaction with Hegseth, who's doing much to cause himself all sorts of problems, as I said at the top of the show.
Leaders who reject rules of engagement forget why those rules exist in the first place, to prevent war from descending into chaos. When someone believes soldiers should operate without limits, civilians become expendable, and that's how disasters begin. You cannot control a volcano by pretending it isn't there. Hegseth and Trump treated restraint as weakness, and now the consequences are circling back. People witnessed what happened in the Caribbean, and they're no longer willing to look away. And when accountability comes, it always lands first on the weaker link, not the one at the top.
I don't think there is any instance of any civilian leader or military leader talking like that. I think that's unprecedented. It's irresponsible in the extreme. He simply should not be saying those things. Second point I'd make is, when I went to West Point back in the day, the My Lai massacre involving Lieutenant Calley was revealed actually by Cy Hirsch in my senior year at West Point in the period 1969, 1970. And I remember very well when the superintendent at West Point, General Coster, was relieved of duty at the time because he had been the commander of the AmeriCal Division, or the 23rd Infantry Division, in Vietnam when that massacre took place. Now, Coster was not responsible for the massacre, but he was in charge, and it happened under his command, and for that reason, he was removed as the superintendent at West Point.
When leaders speak recklessly about killing, it's not just inappropriate. It breaks a sacred norm that has guided militaries for generations. There's a reason such rhetoric is unheard of. It erodes discipline from the top down. The reference to the My Lai era is a reminder that even indirect responsibility carries consequences. Command is not just authority, it is accountability for everything done in your name. When atrocities occur under your watch, the system holds you to the standard of leadership, not excuses. And that's exactly why today's behavior is so alarming. The old safeguards are being ignored.
In all my years in the military was that when you engage in unlawful behavior, you're going to pay a real price, and unlawful behavior is unacceptable. Now, again, that's not to say that it didn't happen, and the fact that the Calley case took place is evidence of that. And by the way, there are a number of people I have known over the years who say that what Calley did was not that exceptional in Vietnam. There were other massacres as well.
There were more than 100 slaughtered.
Well, the point that I'm making to you is that, again, militaries sometimes engage in barbarous behavior. It happens. And what you want to do here is go to great lengths to minimize that. And if you take the comments of Pete Hegseth, what you see is that you're not going to minimize barbarous behavior. In fact, what he's calling for is maximizing it. Do whatever's necessary to accomplish the mission. And if it involves murdering huge numbers of civilians, so be it. That's his message. And again, you simply do not want to make that argument.
For decades, the military drilled one lesson into every soldier: unlawful killing carries consequences. Yet history shows that even with strict rules, barbarity can still erupt when discipline cracks. My Lai was not an isolated monster. It was a warning about what happens when oversight collapses. And that's what makes Hegseth's rhetoric so dangerous. He isn't trying to contain that dark tendency, he's giving it permission to grow. A leader who normalizes brutality doesn't strengthen a mission. He destroys the moral foundation that keeps a military human.
Secretary of Defense Hegseth's comments that you played in his George Patton-like speech explains this. The administration thinks it has the right to shoot anybody who they think may be a bad guy. You don't have to pay attention to whether the people in those boats are fishermen or whether they are drug dealers or narco-terrorists or whatever you want to call them. If you think they are, maybe they're not, but if you think they are, you think there's some reasonable chance that they're bad guys, to quote the congressman, you have the right to just blow them out of the water. Isn't that Hegseth's view?
That is Hegseth's view, and that's the president's view. And these are war crimes when performed by the military. This is expressly prohibited by the Geneva Conventions.
Of course, and that's why you see all this buck passing now, right?
Right.
Trying to blame it on the military. The military will want to blame it on the civilian leaders.
What Heggs is endorsing here isn't tough leadership. It's the abandonment of every legal and moral safeguard in modern warfare. When suspicion alone becomes a license to kill, fishermen and civilians instantly become expendable targets. This is exactly what the Geneva Conventions were written to prevent. And yet the administration treats those protections as optional. That's why we're watching the blame game unfold. Everyone knows these actions cross into war crime territory. No one wants to hold the match when the fire spreads.
Think about it. What we tried to do was to kill those two individuals who survived with the first strike. We just missed. We got everybody else in the boat, but those two individuals. We intended to kill them. And the whole purpose of the second strike was just to finish the job. So
Because, as one of the chatters just wrote, dead men tell no tales. And they don't file lawsuits.
Well, their families file lawsuits. And
Yes.
I don't think we've heard the end of this one.
No, I don't think we've heard the end. And knowing the plaintiff's bar the way I do, they're probably in Latin America interviewing, as we speak, the two survivors.
Judge,
let me move on a little bit to Venezuela. Is the Mossad involved in trying to destabilize the Maduro government?
I have no idea. I'm not sure exactly what role the Mossad is playing here. Yeah, it's quite clear that the CIA is involved, but beyond that, I'm not sure what's going on.
The intent behind the second strike makes everything unmistakably clear. This wasn't self-defense. It was cleanup. Dead men tell no tales isn't a strategy. It's an admission of guilt turned into policy. And when the goal shifts from neutralizing a threat to eliminating witnesses, you're no longer in the realm of warfare but criminality. Survivors mean evidence, lawsuits, and accountability, which is exactly why their existence terrifies the administration. This case isn't going away. It's only just beginning to unfold, and the more people dig, the more this operation will look like a scandal built on secrecy, not security.
Was president said on 4 separate occasions that the United States would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked it. Now, those comments were walked back each time, but not completely. And the mere fact that Joe Biden said it 4 different times is evidence that he was willing to come to Taiwan's defense should China attack it. And I think that what the Japanese prime minister was hinting at is that it's highly likely that Japan would come to Taiwan's defense as well. I mean, it's very important to understand that who controls Taiwan from a purely strategic point of view matters greatly. And the Japanese, the Australians, the Filipinos, the Americans all have a vested interest in keeping Taiwan out of China's hands.
Biden's repeated statements weren't accidental slips. They signaled a willingness to rewrite decades of strategic ambiguity. And once a U.S. president says it out loud, allies start recalculating their own red lines. Japan hinting at direct involvement shows how rapidly this region is militarizing around Taiwan, because whoever controls that island controls a critical hinge point in the Pacific. It's not just ideology driving this, it's geography, trade routes, and raw strategic leverage. And that's why so many countries see Taiwan not as a distant dispute, but as their own front line.
It's too strong. I think the United States is in trouble for sure. I think if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, you look at what's happening in the Middle East, it's quite clear that the United States is in serious trouble. We have been trying, or the Trump administration has been trying to shut down these wars, but it's not succeeded for sure. But the idea that the empire is crumbling, that American military power is under threat, and that the Chinese are dominating us, it's not the case at this point in time for sure. There's no question that China has grown more powerful relative to the United States, at least since the early 1990s. China is now considered a peer competitor. You remember, we lived in the unipolar moment from roughly 1992 to 2017. The United States was the single great power on the planet. Just think about that.
Well, that moment no longer exists.
It no longer exists. That's right. Russia and China are now great powers, and China is considered a peer competitor. And one can tell a story where China continues to grow at a more rapid economic pace than the United States, and over the next decade or so surpasses the American military in terms of the balance of power. So
yes, the United States is strained, but collapse isn't the right word. Transition is. What's fading is the era of unquestioned American dominance, not American power itself. The unipolar moment was always temporary. It just lasted long enough for Washington to believe it was permanent. Now China and Russia aren't rising shadows. They're established poles in a multipolar world. And China becoming a true peer competitor isn't speculation anymore. It's trajectory. The question isn't whether America disappears, but whether it can adapt to a world it no longer controls alone.